The morning sun cast long shadows across the military airfield as Captain James Mitchell walked toward the briefing room. His boots clicked against the concrete with each determined step. The air was thick with the smell of jet fuel and the distant roar of engines warming up for training exercises. James had been stationed at Edwards Air Force Base for 6 months now, but today felt different. Today he would meet the legendary Colonel Harrison Wade. Other pilots had whispered stories about Colonel Wade in the mess hall and during late-night conversations in the barracks. They spoke of a man who had flown more combat missions than anyone could count, who had earned more medals than most people had ever seen, and who possessed an almost supernatural ability to read people with just a glance. But what made the stories truly fascinating was the mystery surrounding certain pilots who had served under him. Some would return from missions changed, carrying themselves with a different kind of confidence, while others simply disappeared from active duty without explanation. James pushed open the heavy metal door to the briefing room. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a harsh white glow on the rows of empty chairs facing a large screen at the front. Maps and charts covered the walls, marked with red pins and flight paths that traced across continents. The room smelled of coffee and the faint odor of marker ink from the whiteboard that dominated one wall. He wasn't alone. 3 other pilots sat scattered throughout the room, each lost in their own thoughts. James recognized Lieutenant Sarah Chen from the flight line. She was known for her precision flying and had graduated top of her class from the Air Force Academy. Next to her sat Captain Rodriguez, a veteran with over 1,000 flight hours who had earned his reputation during multiple overseas deployments. In the back row, Lieutenant Thompson sat quietly, his young face serious as he studied a flight manual. The door opened again, and Colonel Wade entered. The room immediately felt smaller. Wade was not a large man physically, but his presence filled every corner of the space. His silver hair was perfectly groomed, his uniform crisp and adorned with ribbons that told the story of a distinguished career. But it was his eyes that captured attention. They were steel gray and seemed to see everything at once, missing no detail, no gesture, no expression. "Good morning," Colonel Wade said, his voice carrying the authority of decades in command. "I've called you here because each of you has demonstrated exceptional skills in your respective areas. What we're about to discuss is classified at the highest levels. Nothing said in this room leaves this room." The pilots straightened in their chairs. James felt his heart rate increase slightly. This was clearly more than a routine briefing. Colonel Wade moved to the front of the room and pressed a button on a remote control. The large screen flickered to life, displaying a map of Eastern Europe. Red dots marked various locations, connected by dotted lines that suggested flight paths or operational areas. "For the past 18 months, we've been tracking unusual aircraft activity in this region," Wade continued, using a laser pointer to highlight specific areas on the map. "These aren't commercial flights or routine military exercises. The aircraft appear and disappear from radar without warning. They demonstrate flight capabilities that push the boundaries of known technology." Sarah raised her hand slightly. "Sir, are we talking about experimental aircraft from other nations?" Wade's gaze settled on her for a moment before he answered. "That's one possibility. But there are aspects of these sightings that don't fit conventional explanations. Speed profiles that exceed anything in our current inventory, maneuvers that would generate G-forces fatal to human pilots, and, perhaps most concerning, electromagnetic signatures that interfere with our monitoring equipment." The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning system. James exchanged glances with Rodriguez, seeing his own curiosity and concern reflected in the older pilot's expression. "Which brings us to why you're here," Wade continued. "We need pilots willing to investigate these anomalies firsthand. This won't be a standard reconnaissance mission. You'll be flying at the edge of known airspace, possibly encountering aircraft with capabilities beyond our current understanding." Thompson shifted in his seat. "Sir, what kind of support would we have?" "Minimal," Wade replied without hesitation. "For operational security reasons, these flights will be conducted with skeleton crews and limited communication protocols. You'll be flying modified aircraft equipped with enhanced sensor packages, but you'll be largely on your own once airborne." The implications settled over the room like a heavy blanket. This wasn't just dangerous. It was the kind of mission that could end careers or worse. James found himself thinking about his sister back home in Ohio, about the promise he'd made to their parents to stay safe. Wade seemed to sense the shift in mood. I won't lie to you. This assignment carries significant risks, but it also represents an opportunity to be part of something that could change how we understand flight itself. Each of you has skills that make you valuable for this mission, but I need to know you're committed." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "Before we proceed further, I need to know your call signs. Not the ones assigned by your squadrons, but the ones you'd choose for yourselves. The designation that represents who you really are as a pilot." This was unusual. Call signs were typically assigned based on personality traits, memorable incidents, or inside jokes among squadron members. To choose your own was almost unheard of in military aviation. Sarah spoke first. "Precision, sir. I've always believed in the importance of exact execution." Rodriguez nodded when Wade's attention turned to him. "Guardian. I fly to protect others." Thompson hesitated for a moment before answering. "Echo, sir. I've always been good at reading situations and adapting." Finally, Wade's gaze settled on James. The silence stretched for several seconds as James considered his response. He thought about what flying meant to him, about the feeling of freedom and purpose he found in the cockpit, about the way he could see patterns and opportunities that others missed. "Hawk 8, sir," James said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. The moment the words left his mouth, something changed in the room. The other pilots turned to look at him, but it was Colonel Wade's reaction that was most striking. The seasoned officer's face went completely pale, and for the first time since entering the room, he seemed at a loss for words. The silence stretched uncomfortably long, broken only by the soft hum of the ventilation system and the distant sound of aircraft engines outside. Colonel Wade's face remained frozen in an expression James had never seen on a commanding officer before. It wasn't fear exactly, but something deeper and more complex. Recognition mixed with what looked almost like grief. The other pilots sensed the shift in atmosphere immediately. Sarah glanced between James and the colonel, while Rodriguez leaned forward in his chair, his experienced instincts telling him something significant was happening. "Sir?" James asked quietly, uncertain whether he had somehow violated protocol or said something inappropriate. Wade blinked several times, as if awakening from a trance. He cleared his throat and walked to his desk, where he opened a locked drawer with a small key from his pocket. From inside, he retrieved a thick manila folder marked with multiple classification stamps. The folder looked old, its edges worn from handling. "Hawk 8, Wade repeated slowly as if testing the words. "You said Hawk 8. "Yes, sir." "Is there a problem with that designation?" Instead of answering directly, Wade opened the folder and spread several black and white photographs across the desk. Even from their seats, the pilots could see they were aircraft photos, but the planes looked different from anything currently in service. The designs were sleek and angular, with features that seemed both futuristic and somehow familiar. 23 years ago, Wade began, his voice taking on a distant quality. "I commanded a classified squadron operating out of a base that officially didn't exist. We were testing experimental aircraft and investigating the same type of anomalous activity I described to you today." He picked up one of the photographs and held it so the pilots could see it clearly. The image showed a pilot standing next to an aircraft unlike anything James had ever seen. The plane's design seemed to defy conventional aerodynamics, with curves and angles that suggested advanced technology. The pilot in this photograph was Captain Michael Harrison. He was the finest aviator I've ever known, and his call sign was Hawk 8. The room fell completely silent. James felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. The coincidence seemed impossible, yet Colonel Wade's reaction suggested it was anything but coincidental. Wade continued, "Captain Harrison volunteered for a deep reconnaissance mission similar to what I'm proposing to you. He was investigating reports of unknown aircraft operating in restricted airspace over the Nevada desert. His mission parameters were identical to what we're facing now: minimal support, enhanced sensor equipment, and instructions to maintain radio silence except in extreme emergencies." Sarah leaned forward. "What happened to him, sir?" Wade's expression darkened. "He disappeared. On March 15th, exactly 23 years ago today, Captain Harrison took off for what should have been a routine surveillance flight. His last radio transmission was received at 14:30 hours, reporting contact with an unidentified aircraft. After that, nothing." The colonel walked to the window and stared out at the airfield where jets continued their training exercises. their engines creating a constant background roar. We searched for 6 months. Every available aircraft, every piece of technology we had. We found no trace of his plane, no wreckage, no emergency beacon signal. Captain Michael Harrison and his aircraft simply vanished. Rodriguez spoke up, his voice carefully controlled. Sir, with respect, coincidences like this don't happen. There has to be an explanation. Wade turned back to face them. You're absolutely right, Captain Rodriguez, which is why what I'm about to tell you must never leave this room. He returned to the desk and pulled out another photograph, this one more recent and in color. It showed a man in civilian clothes standing outside what appeared to be a small airport. The man looked to be in his 50s, with graying hair and weathered features that spoke of years in the sun and wind. This photograph was taken 6 months ago at a private airfield in Montana. The man in the picture was spotted by one of our intelligence operatives who happened to be in the area on unrelated business. James studied the photograph carefully, noting something familiar about the man's posture and the way he carried himself. There was a confidence there that seemed distinctly military despite the civilian setting. The operative recognized him immediately, even after 23 years. This is Captain Michael Harrison. He's older, obviously, but there's no doubt about his identity. We have confirmation from facial recognition software and from 3 different sources who knew him personally. The implications hit James like a physical blow. But sir, if he's alive, where has he been for over 2 decades? Why didn't he make contact? Wade's expression grew even more serious. That's exactly what we need to find out. The photograph was taken near a facility that doesn't appear on any official maps. Satellite imagery shows unusual aircraft activity in the area, consistent with the anomalous readings we've been tracking. He spread out a new set of documents, including what appeared to be flight manifests and communication logs. We've managed to intercept some communications from the area. Most are encrypted beyond our current ability to decode, but we've identified several call signs being used by pilots operating out of that facility. Thompson looked up from the documents. Are any of them military call signs, sir? Some are. Others appear to be completely new designations. But here's what makes this truly extraordinary. Wade pointed to a specific line on one of the communication logs. This transmission was recorded just last week. The voice print analysis confirms it's Captain Harrison. James leaned closer to read the transcript. The words were brief and cryptic. Hawk 8 to control. Package delivered. Returning to base. The silence in the room was deafening. James felt as though the ground had shifted beneath his feet. The call sign he had chosen spontaneously, the designation that had felt so right when he spoke it, belonged to a pilot who had disappeared decades ago and was now apparently operating from a secret facility. Sir, James said slowly, when I chose that call sign, I had no knowledge of Captain Harrison or his disappearance. It just felt right somehow. Wade nodded grimly. I believe you, Captain Mitchell, which makes this situation even more mysterious. In my experience, there are very few true coincidences in military aviation. Most apparent coincidences are actually connections we haven't yet understood. Sarah raised her hand tentatively. Colonel, are you suggesting that James somehow has a connection to this missing pilot? I'm not suggesting anything yet, Lieutenant Chen. But I am saying that Captain Mitchell's spontaneous choice of that specific call sign, on this specific date, in the context of this specific mission, raises questions that demand answers. Wade closed the folder and locked it back in his desk drawer, which brings us to a decision point. This mission has just become significantly more complex and potentially more dangerous. You all volunteered for a reconnaissance assignment. What I'm now proposing is something different entirely. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. I'm asking you to help me find out what happened to Captain Harrison, where he's been for 23 years, and what he's doing at that facility in Montana. This goes beyond investigating anomalous aircraft. We may be looking at a situation that challenges everything we think we know about aviation, about technology, and possibly about reality itself. The 4 pilots sat in stunned silence, each processing the magnitude of what they had just learned. James stared at his hands, trying to understand how a random choice of words had connected him to a mystery spanning more than 2 decades. Outside, the sound of jet engines continued, but somehow the familiar noise now seemed different, as if the world itself had changed in the space of a single conversation. The next morning arrived with an unusual urgency. James had barely slept, his mind racing with questions about Captain Harrison and the impossible coincidence of the call sign. He arrived at the hangar early, expecting to find it empty. But Colonel Wade was already there, standing next to an aircraft that James had never seen before. The plane was unlike anything in the standard Air Force inventory. Its design was sleek and almost organic, with curves that seemed to flow naturally from nose to tail. The metallic surface had an unusual finish that seemed to shift color slightly as James moved around it, creating an almost hypnotic effect. Most striking were the engines, which were integrated into the fuselage in a way that made them nearly invisible. "This is what Captain Harrison was flying when he disappeared," Wade said without preamble as James approached. "It's a prototype that was officially never built. The project was classified so deeply that even most generals don't know it existed." Sarah, Rodriguez, and Thompson arrived within minutes of each other, each stopping short when they saw the aircraft. Rodriguez whistled low under his breath. "Sir, I've been flying for 15 years and I've never seen anything like this." Wade nodded toward the plane. The official designation was XF-47 Wraith. Only 3 were ever constructed. 1 crashed during testing, killing the pilot. 1 was supposedly destroyed when the project was terminated. And this one disappeared with Captain Harrison. James circled the aircraft slowly, noting details that seemed impossible given the technology available 23 years ago. The cockpit canopy was a single piece of what appeared to be crystal clear material, with no visible seams or joints. The control surfaces were so seamlessly integrated that it was difficult to determine where the wings ended and the fuselage began. "How did you get this one back?" Sarah asked. Wade's expression was grim. "We didn't. This aircraft landed at Edwards 3 days ago at exactly 14:30 hours, the same time Captain Harrison made his last transmission. It came in completely silent. No radio contact, no flight plan. Tower control had no advance warning. It simply appeared on their screens and touched down on runway 04 as if it had been scheduled." Thompson looked confused. "But sir, where was the pilot?" "There wasn't one. The cockpit was empty. When our maintenance crews opened it up, they found this." Wade handed James a small digital device that looked like a modified tablet computer. The screen was black, but when James touched it, text appeared. "Hawk 8. Report to Hangar 7 at 06 WAR for mission briefing. Time is critical. MH." The message was time-stamped for this morning, just 30 minutes ago. "MH," Rodriguez said quietly. "Michael Harrison," Wade nodded. The device appeared in the cockpit after the plane landed. Our technicians couldn't find any way it could have been placed there remotely. The cockpit was sealed when the aircraft touched down. James stared at the message, feeling a connection to something he couldn't understand. "Sir, this is impossible. How could Captain Harrison know I would choose his call sign? How could he send a message specifically to me when we've never met?" "Those are exactly the questions we need to answer," Wade replied. "But first, we need to understand what we're dealing with. Our analysis of this aircraft reveals technology that shouldn't exist. The propulsion system operates on principles our engineers can't explain. The materials used in construction include elements that don't appear on the periodic table." Sarah ran her hand along the aircraft's wing. "It feels warm," she said with surprise. "Even though it's been sitting here all night," Wade nodded. "The entire aircraft maintains a constant temperature of exactly 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Body temperature. We've tried cooling it down, but within minutes it returns to that exact temperature. The power source that maintains this warming system is completely unknown to us." The implications were staggering. James found himself thinking about science fiction stories he had read as a child. But this was real. Sitting in front of him in a military hangar with the morning sun streaming through the open doors. "There's more," Wade continued. "Yesterday evening, we intercepted another transmission from the Montana facility. It was brief, but the message was clear. Hawk 8 has made contact. Proceeding to Phase 2. Expect arrival within 72 hours. Rodriguez looked up sharply. "Arrival where, sir?" "Here at Edwards." The transmission included specific coordinates for this hangar. The group fell silent as the full scope of the situation became clear. They weren't just investigating mysterious aircraft anymore. They had somehow become part of a plan that had been in motion for over 2 decades. A plan that seemed to anticipate their every move. James walked to the cockpit and peered inside. The interior was as unusual as the exterior, with controls that seemed to respond to his presence even though the aircraft was supposedly powered down. Soft lights began to glow as he leaned closer, and text appeared on a display screen. "Welcome, Hawk 8. Please prepare for briefing." "Colonel," James called out, his voice tight with concern. "You need to see this." Wade joined him at the cockpit, followed by the other pilots. The display now showed a map similar to the one they had seen in the briefing room, but with much more detail. Flight paths were marked in glowing lines and coordinates were listed for locations across the western United States. "It's responding to James," Sarah observed. "The displays only activate when he's nearby." Wade's expression was a mixture of fascination and deep concern. "Captain Mitchell, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Have you ever experienced anything unusual during flight? Dreams about flying aircraft you've never seen? Knowledge of procedures you've never been taught?" James considered the question seriously. Now that Wade mentioned it, there had been moments during flight training when he had seemed to understand complex maneuvers instinctively, before his instructors had explained them. He had attributed it to natural talent and extensive study, but the memories took on new significance in light of recent events. "Sometimes," he admitted slowly, "I've had dreams about flying over landscapes I've never seen, in aircraft that didn't look like anything I'd studied. I always assumed they were just dreams." Wade exchanged glances with the other pilots. Captain Harrison reported similar experiences in the months before his disappearance. He described dreams of flying over alien landscapes and operating technology he had never encountered. The pieces of a vast puzzle were beginning to come together, but the picture they formed was more confusing than clarifying. James felt as though he was standing at the edge of a precipice, about to step into territory that would change everything he thought he knew about the world. "Sir," he said finally, "what exactly are you asking us to do?" Wade was quiet for a long moment before responding. "I'm asking you to fly this aircraft, Captain Mitchell. The message was addressed to you specifically, and the plane responds to your presence. I believe you may be the key to understanding what happened to Captain Harrison and what's happening at that facility in Montana." James looked at the sleek aircraft, its surfaces seeming to pulse gently with an inner light. Every instinct told him that flying this machine would change his life forever. But the mystery surrounding Captain Harrison and the impossible connection they seemed to share demanded answers. "When do we leave?" he asked. The moment James settled into the cockpit of the XF-47 Wraith, everything changed. The aircraft came alive around him in ways that defied explanation. Controls that had been dark and unresponsive for the maintenance crews now glowed with soft blue light. Displays showed information in languages he didn't recognize yet somehow understood. Most unsettling of all, he could feel the aircraft's systems responding to his thoughts before he even touched the controls. Colonel Wade's voice crackled through the headset. "Hawk 8, all systems show green from our end. How are you feeling up there?" James ran through the pre-flight checklist but found that many of the standard procedures didn't apply to this aircraft. Instead of conventional instruments, holographic displays floated in the air around him, showing three-dimensional representations of airspace, weather patterns, and flight paths. "Sir, this isn't like anything I've ever flown. The interface seems to be partially telepathic." "Telepathic," Wade's voice carried a note of concern. "I know how that sounds, but when I think about wanting to check engine status, the information appears without me touching any controls. When I consider different flight paths, the navigation system highlights options before I input anything." Through the headset, James could hear urgent conversations between Wade and the technical staff. Words like impossible and unknown technology were repeated frequently. But for James, sitting in the cockpit felt strangely natural, as if he had done this before many times. Sarah's voice came through on a different channel. "Hawk 8, we're monitoring from Chase 1. Everything looks normal from the outside, but our instruments are getting some unusual readings." James looked out at the F-16 flying parallel to him, with Sarah at the controls. Rodriguez and Thompson were in a second chase aircraft, maintaining formation about a mile behind. The support seemed reassuring, but James suspected that if something went wrong with the Wraith, conventional aircraft wouldn't be much help. "Beginning approach to the target coordinates," James reported, following the flight path that had appeared automatically on his displays. The route took them over increasingly remote terrain in Montana, far from any civilian air traffic or military installations. As they flew deeper into the wilderness, James began to notice something strange about the landscape below. What should have been empty forest and mountains showed signs of activity that weren't visible to the naked eye. The Wraith sensors detected underground facilities, concealed landing strips, and what appeared to be a network of tunnels connecting various sites across hundreds of square miles. "Colonel, are you seeing the sensor data I'm transmitting?" Wade's response was delayed, and when it came, his voice sounded strained. "Negative, Hawk 8. We're not receiving any sensor data from your aircraft. According to our instruments, you're flying a completely standard reconnaissance pattern over empty wilderness." James checked his displays again. The underground installations were clearly visible on his screens, marked with identification codes and activity levels. But if the ground crew couldn't see what he was seeing, it meant the Wraith was operating on frequencies or using technology that their standard equipment couldn't detect. "Sir, I'm seeing extensive underground facilities, multiple levels, what looks like aircraft hangars, and a lot of movement. There's definitely something down there." "Understood. Hawk 8, continue with the mission parameters, but exercise extreme caution." As they approached the coordinates from Captain Harrison's message, James felt a strange tingling sensation, as if the air around the aircraft was becoming electrically charged. The Wraith systems began displaying warnings in that unknown language, but again, James found he could understand them. They were approaching some kind of barrier or field that was designed to keep unauthorized aircraft away. "Chase 1, Chase 2, are you experiencing any unusual sensations or instrument readings?" Sarah's voice came back immediately. "Negative. Hawk 8. All systems normal here." Rodriguez confirmed the same from Chase 2. Whatever was affecting the Wraith was specific to that aircraft or to James himself. The tingling sensation intensified, and suddenly James found himself seeing double. His normal vision showed the Montana landscape below, but overlaid on that was another image entirely. He could see a massive facility built into the mountainside, with aircraft that looked similar to the Wraith but with subtle differences in design. Pilots in unfamiliar uniforms moved between buildings that seemed to exist in the same space as the mountain itself. This is going to sound impossible, but I'm seeing two different realities simultaneously. There's the normal landscape, and then there's a facility that exists in the same location but seems to be in a different dimension or frequency." Wade's voice was tense. "Captain Mitchell, are you feeling disoriented? Do you need to abort the mission?" James considered the question seriously. He was experiencing something that challenged everything he thought he knew about reality, but he felt completely in control. If anything, the dual vision was becoming clearer and more manageable. "Negative, sir. I'm maintaining full control of the aircraft, but I think I'm beginning to understand what happened to Captain Harrison." As if summoned by the mention of his name, a new voice suddenly appeared on James's radio. The voice was older, weathered by years, but carried the unmistakable authority of a military pilot. "Hawk 8, this is the original Hawk 8. Welcome to the boundary." James's heart rate spiked. "Captain Harrison?" "That's correct, son. I've been waiting 23 years for you to arrive. You're going to have questions, and I have most of the answers. But first, you need to understand that you're about to cross a threshold that can't be uncrossed." Colonel Wade's voice cut in urgently. "Hawk 8, who are you talking to?" "We're not detecting any other radio transmissions." James realized that Harrison's transmission was coming through the Wraith systems, not through standard military radio channels. "Sir, I'm in contact with Captain Harrison. He's talking to me through the aircraft's communication system." Harrison's voice continued calmly. "James, I need you to listen carefully. The facility you're approaching exists in a parallel phase of reality. Think of it as occupying the same physical space as our world, but shifted slightly out of normal perception. The aircraft you're flying is designed to operate in both phases simultaneously." "That's impossible," James said, though even as he spoke the words, he was looking at evidence that challenged that statement. 23 years ago, I thought the same thing. But impossible things become possible when you expand your understanding of what reality actually is. The beings who built these aircraft exist primarily in the phase-shifted reality, but they've been observing our world for a very long time. Sarah's voice broke in from Chase 1. "Hawk 8, you've been silent for several minutes. Please respond." James realized that his conversation with Harrison was happening outside normal time, or at least outside the time frame that the other pilots were experiencing. "Chase 1, I'm still here. Continuing approach to target coordinates." Harrison's voice took on a more urgent tone. "You have a choice to make, James. You can turn back now and return to your normal life, but you'll always wonder about what you've seen today. Or you can continue forward and learn the truth about what's really happening in our skies. But that knowledge comes with responsibilities you can't imagine. James looked at his instruments, then at the dual reality visible through the cockpit. The choice seemed obvious despite the magnitude of its implications. I'm continuing forward, Captain Harrison. I need to know the truth. I hoped you'd say that. Prepare for phase transition. You're about to see the world as it really is. The phase transition felt like stepping through a waterfall made of light. One moment James was flying over the familiar Montana wilderness, and the next he was approaching a vast installation that defied every law of physics he had ever learned. The facility existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, with structures that extended both deep underground and high into the air, yet somehow occupied no more space than the mountain that concealed it. Welcome to Phase Station Alpha, Harrison's voice said warmly. What you're seeing is the primary research facility for interdimensional aviation technology. It's been operating for over 50 years, but only in the last 25 have we achieved stable phase transitions. James guided the Wraith toward a landing strip that appeared to be carved directly into the mountainside. Other aircraft were visible on the ground, some similar to his own craft, others with designs that seemed to incorporate principles from entirely different technological traditions. Pilots and ground crew moved between the aircraft, but James noticed that many of them didn't appear to be entirely human. Captain Harrison, who exactly are we? And what happened to you 23 years ago? I'll explain everything once you're on the ground. But to answer your first question, we are a joint operation between human military personnel and visitors from parallel realities. Earth exists at the intersection of several dimensional phases, which makes it uniquely valuable for interdimensional research and travel. As James brought the Wraith to a smooth landing, he could see Harrison waiting near the edge of the landing strip. The man looked exactly as he had in the recent photograph, though something about his posture and the way he carried himself suggested experiences that went far beyond normal military service. Hawk 8. Do you copy? Colonel Wade's voice suddenly crackled through the headset, sounding distant and distorted. James realized he needed to maintain contact with his original mission team. Colonel Wade, I'm on the ground at the target coordinates. I'm in contact with Captain Harrison and am beginning the investigation phase of the mission. There was a long pause before Wade responded. Hawk 8, our satellite imagery shows you've landed in an empty clearing. There are no structures visible in your location. Harrison was approaching the aircraft now, and James could see him gesturing for James to shut down the engines and exit the cockpit. Sir, I understand the discrepancy in our observations. I'll provide a full report when I return. Hawk 8 out. James shut down the Wraith systems and opened the cockpit. The air outside had a strange quality to it, slightly thicker than normal atmosphere and carrying scents that reminded him of ozone and something else he couldn't identify. As he climbed down from the aircraft, Harrison extended his hand in greeting. It's good to finally meet you. James, I've been monitoring your career for the past several years, waiting for the right moment to make contact. You've been watching me. How is that possible? Harrison smiled, and James noticed that his eyes had a slight luminescence that hadn't been visible in the photographs. One of the benefits of interdimensional technology is the ability to observe multiple timelines simultaneously. We identified you as a potential candidate when you first entered flight training. Your natural aptitude for aviation and your specific brainwave patterns made you compatible with phase-shifted aircraft. They walked toward a building that seemed to be constructed from materials that shifted between metallic and crystalline depending on the viewing angle. Other personnel nodded respectfully to Harrison as they passed, and James noticed that while some appeared human, others had subtle differences in bone structure and eye color that suggested different origins. The facility operates on several levels, Harrison explained as they entered the building. The surface level handles research and development of conventional aircraft modifications. The deeper levels work with pure interdimensional technology, and the deepest levels, well, that's where we interface directly with our partners from other realities. They entered what appeared to be a briefing room, but the walls were covered with displays showing aircraft designs and flight patterns that seemed to exist in three-dimensional space, rather than on flat screens. Harrison gestured for James to take a seat at a table that appeared to be made from a single piece of some unknown material. 23 years ago, I was exactly where you are now, Harrison began, a military pilot recruited for a mission I didn't fully understand, flying aircraft with capabilities that challenged everything I thought I knew. The difference was that the phase transition technology wasn't as stable then. When I crossed over, I couldn't get back. James leaned forward. But you're clearly still alive and active. What happened during those 23 years? I became part of the research team working to stabilize the transition process. The beings who originally developed this technology needed human pilots who could operate effectively in both phases of reality. Most humans can't handle the dual perception required. But a small percentage of us have brain structures that adapt to interdimensional awareness. Harrison activated one of the three-dimensional displays, showing what appeared to be a cross-section of human brain tissue. Certain areas were highlighted in different colors, and James could see activity patterns that seemed to correlate with the strange sensations he had experienced during the flight. You have the same neural configuration that I do, James. It's extremely rare, perhaps 1 in 10 million people have this particular combination of traits. That's why your choice of the call sign Hawk 8 wasn't a coincidence. On some level, your mind was already connected to this place and to the work we're doing here. The implications were staggering. James thought about the dreams he had experienced, the intuitive understanding of flight maneuvers he had never been taught, and the way the Wraith had responded to his thoughts. Are you saying I've been connected to this facility my entire life? In a sense, yes. The interdimensional fields generated by our research create ripples that extend across both space and time. Sensitive individuals can sometimes pick up these ripples as dreams, intuitive knowledge, or inexplicable skills. We've been aware of you for years, but we needed to wait until you were ready and until the technology was stable enough to ensure you could return to your original reality if you chose. Harrison paused and looked directly at James, which brings us to the choice you need to make. Now that you've crossed over and seen what we're doing here, you can't simply forget about it. The knowledge will stay with you regardless of what you decide. But you can choose to return to your normal life and career, or you can join our research team and help us develop the next generation of interdimensional aircraft. James considered the options carefully. His entire life had been building toward this moment, though he hadn't realized it at the time. The conventional military career that had seemed so important just hours ago now felt like preparation for something far more significant. What about my team? Colonel Wade and the other pilots who came with me. They're safe in the conventional reality phase, though they're probably very confused right now. Time moves differently between the phases, so you have the equivalent of several days to make your decision, while only a few hours will pass in their time frame. Harrison stood and walked to another display, which showed images of Earth from space. But this wasn't the Earth that James knew. Multiple versions of the planet were visible, overlapping and intersecting in patterns that suggested infinite possibilities. This is what we're really working toward, James. Understanding the true nature of reality and developing the technology to explore the infinite variations of existence. The aircraft are just the beginning. We're learning to navigate between different versions of history, different evolutionary paths, different possible futures. James stared at the display, trying to comprehend the scope of what Harrison was describing. And the other beings you mentioned? Who are they? Explorers like us. They've been traveling between realities for thousands of years, but they've never encountered a species quite like humans. We have a unique combination of curiosity, adaptability, and what they call phase flexibility that makes us valuable partners in this research. As if summoned by the mention of them, the door to the briefing room opened and 2 figures entered. They appeared essentially human at first glance, but as James looked more closely, he noticed subtle differences. Their movements were too fluid, their eyes reflected light in unusual ways, and there was something about their presence that suggested vast intelligence and experience. James, Harrison said, I'd like you to meet Dr. Aylin and Commander Thane. They've been leading the interdimensional research program and are very interested in meeting you. James stood as the 2 figures approached, unsure of the appropriate protocol for meeting beings from parallel realities. But Dr. Aylin simply extended her hand in a very human gesture of greeting. We've been looking forward to this meeting. James, she said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in dimensions beyond normal hearing. Your arrival completes a pattern we've been working toward for many years. Dr. Aylin's handshake felt normal, but James sensed something extraordinary about her presence. When their hands touched, he experienced a brief flash of images. Vast cities floating in space, aircraft that moved through realities like ships sailing between islands, and technologies that seem to operate on principles of consciousness rather than mechanics. That's perfectly normal, Commander Thane said, apparently noticing James's reaction. Physical contact with interdimensional beings often triggers what we call perspective sharing. You're briefly seeing fragments of our reality through our memories. James looked between the two figures and Harrison, trying to process the magnitude of what he was experiencing. How long have you been working together? Dr. Aylin gestured toward the three-dimensional displays, which now showed a timeline stretching back decades. Our first contact with Earth's military occurred in 1952, but meaningful cooperation didn't begin until the 1970s. Your government has been aware of interdimensional travel for much longer than most civilians realize. Harrison nodded. The official story about UFO sightings and government cover-ups isn't entirely wrong, but it's also not entirely right. Some of the unexplained aircraft that people have reported over the years were indeed from other realities, but many were experimental human aircraft developed through this collaboration. Commander Thane activated another display, showing technical specifications for various aircraft designs. James recognized some elements from the Wraith he had just flown, but other designs were so advanced that he couldn't even understand their basic operating principles. The aircraft you flew today represents about 20 years of technological development, Thane explained. It's designed to be operated by human pilots but incorporates interdimensional propulsion and navigation systems. Think of it as a bridge between your reality and ours. James studied the technical displays, fascinated despite the overwhelming nature of the information. What makes human pilots particularly suitable for this technology? Dr. Aylin smiled, an expression that seemed to involve more facial muscles than humans typically used. Your species has a unique relationship with linear time and causality. Most beings who develop interdimensional travel lose the ability to exist fully in a single reality. You become spread across multiple phases simultaneously. Humans, however, maintain what we call reality anchoring. You can travel between dimensions while maintaining a primary connection to your original phase of existence. That's why the call sign Hawk 8 has such significance, Harrison added. It represents a specific type of pilot who can serve as an anchor point between realities. The designation has been used by only 3 human pilots in the entire history of this program. James felt a chill of recognition. 3 pilots? You mean and who else? Harrison's expression became somber. Captain Maria Santos. She was Hawk 8 before me, starting in the late 1960s. Her disappearance in 1978 was actually her transition to permanent interdimensional status. She's still active in the program, but she can no longer return to conventional reality. The weight of this revelation settled over James like a physical force. He was part of a lineage of pilots who had been selected for capabilities they didn't know they possessed, to participate in a program that existed outside normal human experience. Commander Thane seemed to sense his concern. James, I want to be very clear about something. Unlike the previous Hawk 8 pilots, you have a choice that they didn't have. Our technology has advanced to the point where we can maintain stable connections between realities. If you decide to join our research program, you won't be trapped here. You can continue to operate in both phases of existence, Dr. Aylin added. We've learned from the experiences of Captain Santos and Captain Harrison. The interdimensional pilot program is now designed to enhance human capabilities, rather than replace them entirely. James walked to the window and looked out at the facility. He could see pilots working with aircraft that defied every law of physics he had ever learned, but they moved with the casual confidence of people doing routine work. In the distance, structures that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously housed technology that could revolutionize human understanding of reality itself. What would my role be if I decided to join the program? Harrison joined him at the window. You would be the primary test pilot for the next generation of interdimensional aircraft. We're developing craft that can not only travel between realities but also between different points in time. The implications for exploration, research, and even preventing catastrophic events are enormous. Time travel? James asked, though at this point he was becoming accustomed to having his understanding of reality challenged. Temporal navigation, Dr. Aylin corrected, moving between different timeline branches rather than traveling backward or forward within a single timeline. Think of it as exploring alternate histories. that actually exist in parallel to our own. Commander, Thane activated a new display showing what appeared to be multiple versions of Earth's history, branching off from various decision points. Every major choice made by individuals or civilizations creates a new timeline branch. Most beings can only perceive their own branch, but with the right technology and training, it's possible to move between them. James stared at the display, seeing versions of Earth where different choices had led to dramatically different outcomes. In some timelines, humanity had achieved space travel centuries earlier. In others, entirely different species had become the dominant intelligence on the planet. And you want me to help develop aircraft that can navigate between these timelines? That's exactly what we're proposing, Harrison said. The Hawk 8 designation represents pilots who can maintain psychological stability while experiencing multiple realities simultaneously. It's an extremely rare capability, and it's essential for the next phase of our research. James thought about Colonel Wade and the other pilots waiting for him in conventional reality. They were probably becoming increasingly concerned about his extended silence and the discrepancies between what they were observing and what he was reporting. What about my responsibilities to my original unit? To Colonel Wade and the mission I was assigned, Dr. Aylin's expression became sympathetic. That's part of what makes this choice significant, James. If you decide to join our program, you would need to maintain your conventional military career as well. You would become a bridge between our project and the standard military aviation community. Your official duties would continue, but you would also be working with technologies and knowledge that can't be shared through normal channels. Commander Thane added, think of it as operating on two levels simultaneously. Your conventional career would provide cover and legitimacy for your interdimensional work, while your experiences here would enhance your capabilities as a pilot in conventional reality. Harrison looked at James seriously. I won't lie to you, it's a demanding existence. You would be living in multiple realities, keeping secrets that could change the world, and taking on responsibilities that most humans can't even imagine. But you would also be part of the most important exploration project in human history. James considered everything he had learned in the past few hours. His entire life seemed to have been leading to this moment, to this choice between a normal military career and participation in something that would redefine his understanding of existence itself. How long do I have to decide? As long as you need, Dr. Aylin said. But remember that time moves differently between phases. We can give you the equivalent of days or weeks to make your decision, while only minutes pass in conventional reality. James nodded slowly. I'd like to see more of the facility before I decide. I want to understand exactly what I'd be committing to. Of course, Harrison said. Let's start with the Advanced Aircraft Development Lab. I think you'll find it very interesting. The Advanced Aircraft Development Lab existed in a space that seemed larger inside than the building could possibly contain. James found himself walking through corridors that extended in directions that shouldn't have been geometrically possible, past workshops where human and interdimensional engineers collaborated on projects that challenged every assumption about technology and physics. In one section, he observed the construction of an aircraft that seemed to be grown rather than built. Organic-looking materials shaped themselves into aerodynamic forms under the guidance of technicians who manipulated the process through what appeared to be direct mental control. In another area, pilots were training in simulators that created complete alternate realities, practicing maneuvers through time streams and between dimensional phases. This is where we developed the temporal navigation systems, Dr. Aylin explained as they entered a lab where multiple versions of the same aircraft existed simultaneously in various stages of completion. Each version represents a different timeline branch of the development process. By observing all possibilities simultaneously, we can select the optimal design path. James watched as engineers moved between the different versions of the aircraft, comparing design elements and making modifications that instantly affected all versions. How do you keep track of which timeline you're working in? Commander Thane smiled. After sufficient training, that becomes instinctive. Interdimensional awareness is like learning a new language. Difficult at first, but eventually natural. The human brain is remarkably adaptable. They continued deeper into the facility, and James began to understand the true scope of the project. This wasn't just about developing advanced aircraft. It was about fundamentally expanding human consciousness and capability. The technology was inseparable from the evolution of the people who used it. "James," Harrison said as they paused in front of a hangar containing aircraft unlike anything James had seen before. "I want to show you something that might help you understand what we're really working toward." The hangar doors opened to reveal an aircraft that seemed to exist in a constant state of transformation. Its shape flowed and changed continuously, sometimes resembling conventional aircraft designs, other times taking forms that had no equivalent in normal reality. Pilots moved around it, but James noticed that they seemed to phase in and out of visibility, as if they were existing in multiple realities simultaneously. "This is the prototype for the next generation of temporal navigation craft," Dr. Aylin explained. "It's designed to adapt its configuration based on the specific requirements of different timeline branches. The pilot doesn't just fly the aircraft. They become integrated with it at a consciousness level." James approached the craft cautiously. As he got closer, he could feel it responding to his presence. The flowing surfaces stabilizing into a configuration that seemed specifically designed for his physical and mental characteristics. "It's recognizing you," Commander Thane observed with satisfaction. "The craft's consciousness interface is designed to work only with pilots who have the Hawk 8 neural configuration. You're seeing it select the optimal form for your particular capabilities." The aircraft had settled into a sleek design that seemed to incorporate elements from every advanced craft James had seen, but arranged in patterns that felt intuitively correct to him. When he placed his hand on the hull, information flooded his mind. Not just technical specifications, but an understanding of how the craft operated across multiple dimensions and timelines simultaneously. "What you're experiencing is a direct consciousness interface," Harrison explained. "Instead of controlling the aircraft through conventional instruments, the pilot's awareness merges with the craft's navigation systems. You think about where and when you want to go, and the aircraft calculates the optimal path through interdimensional space." James removed his hand from the hull, but the connection remained. He could sense the aircraft's readiness, its eagerness to explore the infinite possibilities of interdimensional flight. More importantly, he could feel his own readiness to take on challenges that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. "I've made my decision," James said, turning to face Harrison, Dr. Aylin, and Commander Thane. "I want to join the program." Harrison smiled with genuine warmth. "I hoped you would, but you need to understand that this decision will change not just your life, but potentially the entire course of human development. The Hawk 8 pilots serve as bridges between humanity's current reality and the expanded consciousness that interdimensional travel requires." Dr. Aylin activated a final display, showing what appeared to be a star map, but with connections between points that represented something more complex than physical distance. "This shows the network of realities that we've mapped so far. Each point represents a different version of Earth, a different timeline branch, or a different dimensional phase. With the completion of the Temporal Navigation Project, we'll be able to explore all of these possibilities," Commander Thane added. "And with human pilots who can maintain stability across multiple realities, we can establish permanent connections between the most beneficial timeline branches. Imagine being able to share technologies and knowledge between versions of Earth where different problems were solved in different ways." The implications were staggering. James could envision a future where humanity had access to the combined wisdom and achievements of countless alternate histories, where the mistakes of one timeline could be corrected using solutions developed in another. "When do we begin training?" James asked. "Immediately," Harrison replied. "But first you need to return to conventional reality and complete your original mission. Colonel Wade and your team need to receive a report that will satisfy their requirements while maintaining operational security for our project." James nodded, understanding the necessity of maintaining his cover identity. "What should I tell them?" Dr. Aylin handed him a small device similar to the one that had appeared in the Wraith's cockpit. "This contains sensor data and analysis reports that will explain the anomalous aircraft activity in terms that conventional military intelligence can understand and act upon. The information is accurate but incomplete. It will give them enough truth to justify their investigation without revealing the full scope of what's happening here. Your official report will describe discovering evidence of advanced experimental aircraft being tested by an unknown organization," Commander Thane explained. "This will trigger increased surveillance and investigation efforts." which will actually help us by providing additional cover for our operations. Harrison walked with James back toward the hangar where the Wraith waited. You'll return to Edwards and resume your normal duties for now. Within a few weeks, you'll receive orders for a new assignment that will provide more opportunities for interdimensional training. The transition will be gradual, giving you time to adapt to operating in both realities. As they reached the Wraith, James could see that the aircraft had already been prepared for the return journey. The modifications that had allowed it to phase between realities were still active, but now configured to ensure a smooth transition back to conventional space. Remember, Dr. Aylin said as James prepared to climb into the cockpit, you're no longer just a pilot. You're an explorer of infinite possibilities, a bridge between what humanity is and what it can become. The designation Hawk 8 carries responsibilities that extend far beyond any normal military assignment. James settled into the cockpit, feeling the aircraft's systems respond to his presence with even greater sensitivity than before. The consciousness interface that he had experienced with the temporal navigation prototype was now partially active in the Wraith, giving him awareness of multiple flight paths across both space and time. Hawk 8, you are cleared for departure. Harrison's voice came through the communication system. Welcome to the Interdimensional Pilot Program. Your real career begins now. As James lifted off from the hidden facility, he could see it fading from normal perception, shifting back to the phase-shifted reality where it existed beyond conventional detection. But his enhanced awareness allowed him to maintain visual contact, even as the aircraft transitioned back to normal space. His radio crackled with Colonel Wade's voice. Hawk 8, we've been monitoring your position. What's your status? James looked at the device Dr. Aylin had given him, which was already interfacing with the Wraith's communication systems to transmit the prepared sensor data. Colonel, mission accomplished. I have extensive sensor data on the anomalous aircraft activity and am returning to base for full debrief. Outstanding. Hawk 8, Chase 1 and Chase 2 are cleared to escort you home. As Sarah and Rodriguez moved their F-16s into formation beside him, James reflected on the magnitude of what had just occurred. To them, he had been gone for perhaps an hour on a routine reconnaissance mission. To him, he had just committed to a role that would fundamentally alter the course of human history.